Welcome to our tutorial on how to mix for the stream at PBF. In this short video, I want to explain not just the hows, but the whys, and some basic mixing principles that are going to help you be successful. We want folks who watch remotely not to have to endure our worship services, but to enjoy them. Now, your role is one of the most important roles for our online audience. If they can't hear something, then they'll tune out or turn it off and possibly lose the message of hope in Christ that we're trying to communicate. So many folks check out a church online before they ever step foot in the door. So our front door has moved out onto the internet. We want to have the best door we can that represents PBF to the community. So two big mixing ideas are this. Number one, make it sound like the person at home is in the room. And number two, always be thinking, what is coming next so that you're ready for it. Number one, make it sound like they're in the room. All around us, we hear not just the sound from a vocal or an instrument, but its reflections. Now, sound bounces around the room. A large room has a lot of reflections, and the sound carries on for a while. A small room has short reflections and dies pretty quickly. Think of a living room. You're so used to hearing this that you don't even notice it until what you hear doesn't line up with what you see. Now, a dry mix is a terrible mix. You gotta give it some reverb or some space. We do this by adding reverb effect, or better yet, use room mics. They are your friend and they're gonna tie everything together. Our gathering space is about the size of a gymnasium, so you wanna make it sound appropriate. And number two, always be thinking what's coming next so that you're ready for it. A good live mixing engineer is always ready with that next microphone or video that plays. You always wanna be ahead of the game. You don't wanna be caught having to scramble looking for a fader that's down because you forgot that announcements was next and you can't hear the announcement person. Or maybe in a song, be ready for that keyboard instrumental or that guitar solo. Always know what's coming next. Okay, now for the how-to. You're gonna begin by turning everything on, by turning the mixer on first, and then the monitors. Our setup consists of these two monitors and a subwoofer on the floor. We use the Behringer X32 as our mixing console, a very popular digital board with churches. The X32 has 32 inputs, and those inputs are configured on 2 layers of 16 channels. Those channels are labeled. You see here, on layer 1, we've got drums, guitars, and keys, etc. Some channels are stereo, and some are mono. Layer 2 has vocals and computer audio channels. The pastor's mic is here as well as the room mics. Each channel group is labeled with a different color. On the right here, we've got our mixing bus. We've got our drum channel and our reverb for drums, our band and instrument channel, and our vocal channel with reverb and effects of delay and reverb. And finally, the last fader is our main output. And you can think of these, we call this a bus, as a city bus that certain channels get on to ride to the main output. Now, once I get my drums mixed well, I can raise or lower the entire volume of the entire drum kit with just moving this one drum bus fader. The same with the band, instruments, and the vocals. Now let's look at an individual instrument channel. Here's the acoustic guitar channel. The first thing you're going to want to do is to make sure the incoming volume, we call that gain, is not too hot and not too quiet. So we select the channel we want, and then we come up here to the gain knob in the upper left corner, and we turn it so that we see enough signal, but we don't overload it, because that causes distortion and it's not the good kind. If the gain is too low, no matter how much you move the fader, you'll never get the signal loud enough. And if the incoming gain is too high, you get distortion and you can't bring the fader low enough to mix well. You want to make sure the gain is not going above -9 decibels. The good news is that most of these channels have been set up already, so often you won't have to make any changes. But if you do, they're minor. But you don't want to skip this step. Whenever we select a channel, all this stuff up here affects only that channel you've selected. You'll see all these dials change when I select a new channel. One of the common mistakes is to move one of these knobs when you've had the wrong channel selected. You've got EQ over here, gating, compression, which is dynamics, and etc. As a general rule, you won't be changing any of these knobs. We've preset them for the best sound. And in case you're tempted to change the EQ, here's your gentle reminder, don't adjust EQ. Once you've got your gains set on all your channels, let's start putting together a mix. Begin by raising the mixing bus faders to the 0 mark, or what's called unity gain. When the faders are at unity gain, you're not adding any volume and you're not subtracting any volume to the signal coming in. Let's start with the main output fader, then the drums, the band, and the vocals. Next, let's begin with the drums. The kick and the snare are your most important sounds coming from the drum set. You get those balanced and then add in the toms and the overheads. Be careful not to put in too much overhead. The cymbals can wash out the overall sound very quickly. Okay, there's a good drum sound. Now let's add some bass. Bass and drums are the foundation of the band. Everything else sits on top of those. Let's add some acoustic guitar, and some electric, and some keys. We want to be able to hear everything and not let one instrument overpower the mix. Now the vocals. Here's my thought on vocals. The lead vocal is the most important and should be featured. The background vocals should support the lead and should just barely be heard. We want to avoid competing vocals. You never want the background louder than the lead vocal. We also want the lead vocal to sit in the mix and not too far out front. I find this is best done by overdoing it and then underdoing it and finding that middle ground that sounds about right. You get to be an artist in this situation. Do what sounds good and full. But also, you're the gatekeeper. If a background vocal is off key or sounding funny, feel free to turn them down. They will thank you later. I'd rather have someone not in the mix than featured and be embarrassed by their vocal. A good mix is often about what you're leaving out than making sure everyone is heard. So let's mix the vocals in.
For me, who can be against me? For Jesus, there's nothing impossible.
Sounds about right. Now let's add some reverb and dimension. As I said before, you want to make people feel like they're in the room. No one wants someone singing right in your ear, and a dry mix is what that sounds like. Dry mixes are brutal. It's like a movie star with no makeup. No one wants to hear or see that. You have two tools for this, the reverb vocal bus and the room mics. Now I find the room mic faders are going to be your primary tool for this. We want folks at home to hear the congregation singing and make them feel like they're in the room. Let's add some now.
And almighty fortress, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of our God.
A golden rule is the mix is never static. Don't just set and forget, because music is dynamic and so should the mix be. Now what do I mean by that? Well, when a band drops for a breakdown section, maybe raise the volume of the solo instrument. For instance, here when the band drops, I'm going to raise the keys a bit to make up for the lost volume of the other instruments.
And almighty fortress, you go before us.
Or, here's one of my favorite things. During a breakdown section, raise the room mics and so you hear the audience. Listen to this.
Nothing can stand against the power of our God. You shine in the shadows, you win every battle. Nothing can stand against the power of our God.
Mixes are never static. Looking for that upcoming electric guitar solo, maybe give them a slight boost. Doesn't take much, but it really adds to the mix. You're like a tour guide, helping people notice certain elements along the journey. You don't want those elements to poke you in the eye, but rather just something to notice. Reverb sounds great during a song, but not so much when people are talking. When worship leader is talking before or in between songs, bring the reverb down on the voices. It sounds weird to hear them in a cave while they're talking. The room mics will give them enough space to feel like we're still in the room. You want to always leave the computer mics on. This way, if any video comes on, your audio is ready to go. You know, how many times have you seen a video start to play and the audio comes in a second later, and so you miss the first sentence? Leaving the computer channel hot keeps that from happening. I like to check my mix at different room volumes. Up here is where you can adjust the volume of the monitors in your mix. This does not change what goes out to the world, only what you hear in this room. I like to see if the mix still sounds good at loud volumes and quiet volumes. Do I hear everything still? Does something jump out at me? The main fader is what determines how loud your mix is to the outside world. And you're looking for something in the -10 decibel range. That way our video producer has enough signal to work with. The musical part of the worship service is the most challenging for churches to get right. We hear music around us all the time that is professionally mixed and recorded. Your job is to make volunteer musicians sound as good as we can. So everything, does it sound balanced? Can I hear the drums? How about the guitars or the keyboards? Is that lead vocal clear? Can I hear the pastor's sermon? These are all good questions to ask when you mix. All right, hey, so to put some of this into practice, I'm just gonna mix this song real quick and see if we can pick up some tidbits along the way. This is how I generally work. I'm gonna start with my main fader, bring up my vocals, my band bus, and my drum bus, and I'm gonna mix the kick and the snare right away. I overdo it a little bit on the overheads and I bring them down. Those cymbals can wash out pretty quick. Okay, so now I got my drums where I like them. Bring in the bass. Bring some acoustic guitar in. Things can add up pretty quick, and so I want to be careful about making something too loud and then having something else come in later has to compete. Electric. Bring some keys. Let's do some vocals now.
I'll fight on my knees with my hands lifted high. Oh God, the battle belongs.
So it's kind of loud on the background. Just want to barely support it.
I lay at your feet.
Again, I do this by overdoing it and then underdoing it to see where it sounds right. There's a couple of vocal channels here that they're hot, but no one's singing on them, so there's no point in using them. So I want to make sure I mute those. So vocal 5 is live, but no reason to add it in the mix.
For Jesus, there's nothing impossible for you.
Feels like a generally good mix. I'm going to add some reverb on the vocals and the drums. So I'm going to show you what that sounds like. That's drums, reverb with the drums, no reverb. It's too much, bring it down. The room mics are going to be the ones that really add in the overall. Right? You hear that? So let's unmute these guys. So right now, coming up here is a breakdown section where the band drops out. This is where I want to kick up those room mics. And the keyboard is playing by itself. So I give that a little bit of a boost to fill in the gap for all those other instruments. I can hear those, the audience kind of singing there, right? It starts to build. If you leave those room mics hot the whole time, notice how the drums sound really far in the background. So sometimes I bring those back down when the band comes back in. Listen to this, how distant it sounds. Kind of washes everything out when you have the room mics too hot. So I bring them down a little bit. And then can I hear everything at low volume? There's the vocals. You can hear everything, and here's loud volume. Okay, another tip over here is our tempos on our delays and reverbs. You can tap these in with a song. And it really helps when you're in delays. Here's, for instance, the vocal delay. Now, obviously, too much sounds goofy. My volume up here is good. I'm at around -10. It's perfect.
Isaiah 44 says this. This is what the Lord says.
If I have too much reverb,
Redeemed you in the womb.
sounds terrible.
The Lord,
You want to kill
maker
that.
of all things, who stretches out the heavens.
Room
who
mics
stretched
are
out
good
the
for
earth
this.
By myself.
I feel like I'm in the room
That's the
still.
God we trust in, that we worship, the only true God. So we sing to Him.
There's a button over here called the effects button.
And
It kills all the effects except the room mics. And so that's a great thing to hit, especially when you want someone's talking. Now let's boost those room mics a bit. You hear the audience? It's a beautiful moment. Maybe you throw up that acoustic guitar a little bit. We call this, they're landing the plane. The song is coming to an end, right? We're kind of hitting that chorus section or bridge section at the end, meant to be a cappella. So make it a moment where you hear all the voices and the instruments art is important. And then know what's coming next. So that's how I mix a song. Well, thanks for watching this video. We do our best while always striving to get better, and that's good enough. Thanks for serving here at Peninsula Bible Fellowship.